And I find a lot of people are willing to go to the point of murder to defend their fears. Yep. So we come down here, yep. And then here.
I really don't like feeling fear.
Join the club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I prefer feeling sadness.
Yes.
I have this idea that if I'm humble to fear, I will reach a sadness.
Yeah, how does it work that I can kind of feel sadness, but then I still have all this fear? And shouldn't I be...
I think sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
I'm trying to build some faith here.
Yeah.
That if I face the feeling of the fear, it will lead to tears, which I'm more comfortable with.
Yeah.
So because right now it's like it's a closed chapter with fear. It's like
I'm not going there.
No, I'm not going there.
Don't
So
go there.
maybe I'm trying to get a picture.
Yeah. Well, a lot of our questions are driven by the desire to say, surely there's another way. And let's talk about fear as a feeling, shall we? A general rule is that most women, in particular most women, are more prepared to feel sadness than fear. So the way our internal system works, and this is for everybody, so just rub out all those things. We don't like those things anymore. We're not going to have them. So for most people, you could say fear is a feeling that we prefer to not feel. Right? The fear itself covers the real grief that we have. Now, if we are up here, higher than our fear, and this place is a place of, firstly, you see, we do a lot of things to avoid fear. We create addictions, and the purpose of the addictions is to comfort our fears. Makes sense to you? Yep. So we're created addictions to comfort ourselves so we don't have to feel fear. Right? When our addictions are not met, we go to anger. And a lot of people are uncomfortable feeling anger nowadays as well because it's been beaten out of you as a child not to do that. So a lot of people go quickly from anger to complete denial, of any emotion at all. Numb. You could say numb. Right? Which is a more preferred way that most people in modern society have to feel anger, particularly women. That makes sense? Women, you're taught that anger is not feminine, and so, you can't go there. So most women go numb instead of feeling anger. But even anger is an expression of when I didn't get my addictions met, and my addictions are there so that I don't have to feel my fears. Right? So we've got this sort of process occurring for the majority of us where fear is the thing I think is the problem. And I need to feel fear. Like fear is in most people now as a feeling, and there's a lot of reasons why that is the case. The major one being that we were belted or treated violently as a child whenever we had grief, and so we learnt to be afraid of it. We learnt to be afraid of truly experiencing grief. We talked about this a bit in Brussels, didn't we? Because we talked about the lengths people will go to avoid grief. Right? Like if someone starts crying in this, like let's say a child starts crying in a plane. Almost everybody there starts doing what? Projecting at the child. Shut up, can't the mum shut her up, put a dummy in its mouth, give it some food, shut the thing up. There's so much projection of emotion at the child having a cry because the average person on earth has a huge amount of grief and they don't want to be reminded of it. Right? And a child crying reminds them. And so they just don't want to experience that. They don't want to feel it at all. Yep. Is it related? Yes? No, just go back one. I want the relation first. Yep.
Is it possible to feel the grief straight away? And does it remove the
Well, that's the question you just really asked, isn't it? So in a different way. So this is what I'm answering. So let's keep going. Now, if this is the way we've constructed ourselves, our inner world, which it is, then can you see that if I don't get my addictions met, I will revert to anger. But if I meet my addictions, it helps suppress my fear. So for most people, this is the state of comfort. Isn't it? So for most people, addictions mean comfort. That's when I'm comfortable, when I'm having my addictions met. Whenever my addictions aren't met, I revert to anger. And if that's not preferred, then numb out, detune. But if my addictions are not met, I never go this way, do I? And go, why am I so afraid that I need that addiction? I am so embroiled in my addictions generally that I don't ever go through my fears. Right? But what's going to happen is to get to this grief, I've created this layer. You could say the fear is like a barrier to the true grief. So the fear has created a force field around your grief. That's the thing you're protecting, your grief. And your fear has created a force field around it. So, if I'm going from my addiction to my grief, am I really dealing with any grief? If the purpose of the fear is to force field around my grief, I can't really be getting to grief. I'm just giving myself the illusion I'm getting to grief. You follow? So for many women in particular, what happens is, see, most men are terrified of grief. They'll admit that. And they never go there, and they'll do a whole heap of other things. In their fear, they will do their addictions, and if they don't work, they'll go to anger. And men are really good at anger, usually better than women, because we've been allowed to be better at women at it and so we go there more frequently. But if anger doesn't work, we go into all sorts of things. All the things we listed down here, like doubt, denial, illusion, intellect. Men just, they're like gymnasts with managing their grief. You know what I mean? Women generally are not like that. Women have generally their addictions and their terror about their grief. And so most women find that they are more comfortable with grief, but not the grief that they're really terrified of. And because usually there's been violence associated with this grief of some kind, either emotional violence or physical violence or sexual violence associated with the grief, they have a layer of terror around their grief.
Could we also add there that often women find it harder to deny that there is sort of intense grief, emotion within them.
Yeah.
Men have been socialised more to just sort of really deny it. But often women, as we start to talk about these things, they feel the emotions start to stir up, and then it triggers more fear, if you like, than the men. The men are often like, yeah, no worries, I'll engage with this with my intellect. But in Belgium, what happened was a lot of the women were like, I can feel things now, and whoa, this is freaking me out. And so some of them sort of went into anger to try and suppress that fear.
But let's just for a moment look at the grief that you actually have and why you're terrified of it. What happened to you as women to cause you to be so terrified of the real grief? So, see, if you acknowledge what the grief is really about and where it really came from, And if you're honest with yourself about that, where does your grief really come from? Where does your grief originate?
Do you want to have the microphone back to
Now,
Daniela?
women are answering this question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know from you girls where your grief originates.
Usually from men, from father.
So you feel from father?
Yeah.
Right? So from men, should
Yeah.
we say men? How has your grief originated from men? Right, you tell me how.
Because men suppress me.
Okay, so one of the primary ways men suppress you is whenever you get emotional, what do they say? How do,
It's, I don't know, different things. Like, I cannot...
when a woman is crying, you guys need to be honest with yourself. When a woman is crying, how do you feel? So, Julius, let's ask the men now. How do they feel when a woman cries?
Condescending and belittling.
Condescending? Yeah. I have the same problem. We've got to look it up.
SC. Yeah.
And what was the other one you said?
Belittling.
Sorry.
Belittling.
Belittling, yes. Belittle. Yeah. So you're belittling their control of emotion, aren't you? Their emotional state. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
With Tanya, if she's crying on the street, I feel afraid of the other people's reactions.
Okay.
I just move away. I just like, okay, you cry.
So you sort of reject her. Yeah.
So embarrassed?
I'm not with you.
Embarrassed?
Yeah.
You feel embarrassed?
Well, could be, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Embarrassment? Yep. Yep. Yep.
It's like I doubt that they're really hurting.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like, what are they crying about?
Are they just
Are
manipulating
they just
me?
manipulating me? Right? So suspicious. Okay. What else? Yep.
Something is wrong. I need to fix her.
Okay. I need
Panic.
to fix it. Like I'm responsible. I need to fix it. So I just
Panic,
put it as
worry, responsibility.
worry, responsible. And you don't want to be responsible, right, for a woman crying, so, yeah. Okay, can you see these groups of emotions must cause a woman to feel like she shouldn't be feeling emotion. Now, why do you feel that way? Why are you reliant on men in order to feel your emotion? So can the women answer this question? Charlotte?
I want their approval.
So you want approval from men? So I should put this in a different colour, shouldn't I?
Green,
Just
very
so
green.
these are women, the women's feelings. So you want approval? Yeah. Go up the back, thanks. And then Olga. Yeah.
I want to be seen as a person.
You want to be seen? What do you mean by seen? Sort of like acknowledged as equal?
Yeah, like myself, whatever that means.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's fairly open definition, but Olga, you had?
I want to feel secure.
Secure. This
Safe.
is safe, secure. This is a big thing for women. You can understand why, because in history, and we're talking now for thousands of years, unless a woman had a man in her life, she was not safe from rape, from abuse. She was not safe from being killed. She was not. Her children weren't safe, right? Unless they had a man to protect them. So a lot of it's about needing protection, right? These emotions are in generations of women, right? So they're looking for men to protect them. They're looking for men to make them feel safe. And if a man's feeling these things, can you see you don't feel safe anymore? You don't feel protected anymore. The very person who's protecting you is telling you you're doing the wrong thing. Right? So that's going to be tricky, isn't it? Now, that's when you express grief. Can you see, though, why you're afraid? If every time you get to the real grief, a man feels these things, and then that's going to make you feel these things in the opposite, like disapproved of, unseen, unheard, insecure, unsafe. You feel threatened, like with your life threatened. Most women feel threatened as soon as they start to feel something of significance. They now feel the threat that's existing in their life and in their past, and that's why they're so terrified. And they don't want to go through that. They don't want to go through the terror of the threat.
Yeah, and can I add to that that often when I connect to the real grief, then I'm more connected to truth. That's when I'm. It's almost like when I avoid the grief, I can somehow deny the truth of the problems that are in my life. When I connect to the real grief, I can't deny it, and now I feel more urgency to act in harmony with the truth.
We're not going to accept the truth that actually men are in my life for this purpose.
Only that purpose.
And only for that purpose. And if I start feeling that and accept the truth that men are there to make me feel approval, seen, heard, safe, secure, protected, and I'm starting to feel grief, that then I'm starting to realise that actually they're not making me feel that. They're making me feel these things on the reverse end. Yeah. Instead, this is how they really feel about me. Unless I do exactly what they want, then they will do these things for me. Now, most women are very terrified for that reason. And there's multi-generational terror. So many of you ladies have women spirits with you who are just as terrified as you are about having the feeling of terror and then getting to the real grief. And so whenever you start feeling sadness, true grief, you've not only got your own feelings of threat to deal with, but you've also got a bunch of women spirits around you going, don't go there, don't go there, don't go there. You're going to be unprotected if you go there. You're going to be in a space where men will get angry with you. They'll get upset with you. They won't look after you anymore. So there's a lot of pressure on women on earth to not feel their real grief. There's also a lot of pressure from men to not feel the real grief, because once you feel the real grief, you'll realise the average man is actually like this towards you. The average man is condescending, he is belittling, he's basically embarrassed whenever you have an emotion because he doesn't like his own emotion. He's basically suspicious of you, and particularly sexually suspicious of you, right? And the average man doesn't want to be responsible for your feelings either. And he may worry, but his worry is projected as rage at you generally. And so the average man doesn't feel very good about women. And so the more you grieve, the more you realise that. And it becomes more and more difficult to not at some point realise that this is why you're terrified. Now, it's been interesting at home because we've had the opportunity for the last couple of years probably, haven't we, where we've met with a group of people, the same group of people for every week for it must be 4 or 5 years now. In that group, the women are starting to have breakthroughs about dealing with their terror, about men and how they view men and how they see men and everything. And it's really interesting to see the change, because as they do that, they soften up emotionally, and they soften up emotionally enough to ask God for love, and some of them start receiving love as a result of that. And the more love they receive, the more aware they become of how men have been manipulating, particularly their fathers, have been manipulating their life. And the more aware of that they come, that is triggering even a bit more fear, and then they've got to feel some fear as well. And so they're learning how to feel their terror through that process. Does that make sense? But for most women, you're not going to get to the real grief until you feel some of these fears of the disapproval, the feeling that you're invisible. In most families, mothers do so much work like cooking, cleaning, looking after the kids, running things around, doing the functional things, that everybody, including their own children, eventually don't see how much work they're doing as a general rule. And so even becoming a mother, which most women have been taught from babies, is how to be a real woman. And yet, even after they've done that, they end up being completely unseen and unrecognised. And you look at society. Does society really recognise even the role of a mother? Like, how important it is to society? Not really, because for most part, if you're asked, what do you do? And you say, I'm a mother, most people go, oh, that's very uninteresting. Yeah. So there are a lot of reasons why women are terrified. Some of them are historical and some of them local, like current. And for most women, they would prefer to never feel it. There is a lot of things you will learn by feeling it. And a lot of the things you will learn is how you've been covering over your grief by being terrified. It's one of the things you will learn. Yeah. So that's, Olga, yes?
How can you best confront this?
Confront what?
To get to the fear.
To get to the fear?
Yeah.
Well, firstly, you need to, these are the problems, aren't they? Yeah, because your addictions are the comforts you have to avoid your fear. So what you're going to find is you're going to have to deconstruct your addictions first. So once the addictions are deconstructed, not validated but deconstructed, then the fear will be exposed. And the fear that will be exposed is this generalised fear you have, particularly in your relationships with men. That will all get exposed. And for many of you as well, there are fears related to yourself, like in the sense of, how am I really internally, am I ever going to be myself? Because my role in history has to be there for the men. So how am I going to ever finish up being myself in the process of my growth? This will all get exposed. This is where your terror is. And that terror, once exposed, now it's more readily able to be felt. And you'll feel it as, you'll find yourself some days, like, this is what Mary has been finding the last maybe year or two, isn't it? Some days you're just sitting there and all of a sudden Mary just starts shaking and feeling what she feels as the threat to her life on earth. Does that make sense? And that's what you'll go through. You'll need to go through the experience of it as a part of the process. Yeah? Yes. And then up the back as well. So.
When I start feel...
mic up a bit so I can hear it better.
When I start feeling fears, my tendency is to disconnect from my body. Like I am going up somewhere.
Yeah,
I don't
closer
know.
with the mic again.
Yeah.
That's better. So you can hear yourself in there.
Yeah. And then I start fear about that disconnection, and I'm feeling that, but I cannot feel that fear because I disconnect on the first place.
Yeah.
And that addiction, and how to go to.
Yeah, it's an addiction to get away from your fear. It's a way. It's like numb myself to my fear, get away. And a lot of women are experts at getting out of their body. And this is why many women also have sexual problems as well, because they're getting out of their body. And why, when I say sexual problems, I mean difficulty with orgasm and difficulty with sexual connection, getting out of the body. But also because you've been taught fear is something you want to avoid. Fear is something that you feel like you can't handle. And so if you're out of your body, then of course you don't have to feel what the body's feeling. Now, it's going to require effort to get back into your body.
Yes, I'm trying, but it's really hard to me to...
Whenever you don't want to do something, you've got to pray about why you don't want to do it. So if you start experiencing fear and then you go out of your body, then of course you need to pray about, well, why did I just go out of my body? What was the reason for doing that? Right? God can share with you why you're doing it. And for each of you, it may be different reasons. But what I find is a lot of times there's the perceived threat from the environment, and that then causes you to say, I can't feel this terror. Get out of it instead. Right? And so you've got to undo that process. And you're asking me how, but for each of you it's going to be different, isn't it? Because each of you have different reasons for going out of your body.
And the principle is don't try to force yourself back. Be
gentle and find why you
with
did
yourself about why. And then you'll discover, and then you'll never do it again.
Yeah.
But, the problem lots of us have is like, I know I need to feel my fear. Now I've gone away. Oh, I've got to get back there. But
then you start getting punishing on yourself and heavy with yourself, and that's not going to help.
Shuts everything down.
Yeah. It's not going to be good for you. Yeah. Because fundamentally a part of this is loving yourself. Now, it's not loving to avoid your fear, right? But it's also not loving to punish yourself for having it. And it's also not loving to punish yourself for avoiding it. Right? So you need to deal with the lack of love of self in the process of trying to get away from your feelings. Also, there's a trust in God issue here. For women, when they start feeling terror, they don't trust God anymore. Right? For men, when they start feeling sadness, they don't trust God anymore, generally. But for women, it's when they start feeling fear. Yeah? Now, also, but I must say, men do have a lot of fear, but a lot of times it's fear of their grief. Men also do have a lot of fear generally, but a lot of times they use their intellect to get themselves so far away from it that they think they have none. Right? So you guys who think you have no fear, you're lying to yourself. Everyone on earth is going to experience fear at some point. And the degrees of fear will depend on the experiences you've had. Like if a man's gone to war, his fear is going to be intense because there was a daily threat to his life while he was at war. So his fear levels are going to be intense. Also, if he had an abusive father, his fear levels are going to be intense, right? Because his life's in daily threat of violence. So he's going to have some fear and it's going to be quite intense, right? For women, they've experienced that and usually more sexual fears as well, like fear of being raped, fear of getting sexually harmed, right? There's that additional thing that most women feel. You walk down the street here in Innsbruck and the average man is sexually projecting at almost every woman he sees, and certainly every attractive woman he sees, right? And men are taught that this is normal behaviour. You know, most men even say to themselves, I'm a man, what do you expect? Now, for most women, you feel that as a sexual threat. So there's fears about, being open or free sexually. There's also fears about what men will do, if they find you attractive. A lot of women, as they get older, they purposefully want themselves to be less attractive in order to avoid the projections. Or they go down the other track of they've, makeup and trying to keep themselves beautiful, so men at least find them attractive, so men won't make fun of them or ridicule them anymore. Right? So women have a very complicated life on earth, and you need to, at some point, admit to yourself how bad it really is and has been for women on earth. And it has been worse for women on earth for many centuries than it has been for men. For many centuries. It's just a fact of the problems that are on earth between men and women. Yeah. So does that help? Yep.